Breaking news, Ben. Coming out with RC0, some new functionality inside of the database engine, maybe, regarding AI and models. Ben, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about ONNX. I think that says it all. I mean, who has not heard about ONNX? I'm not even sure that's how you say it, but okay, show of hands, who has not heard about ONNX before? That would be me.
Well, I mean, we talked
But it's
about it
still
before in the prep for the session, so we're good there.
okay.
Okay.
Touche.
Haha.
Um, it's an interesting concept. So I still think. Let me start at that. It's not the most valuable or probably the most going to be used feature that we've talked about
Mhm.
so far on this series, because from my perspective, and folks in the comments, feel free to chime in as usual and let us know if you disagree. But let's walk through it and then we can come to a judgment on it. Shall we do the animation where we dive into the demo that I still haven't
Yes.
invested in yet? I still gotta pay someone to do it.
Fiverr.
Anyway, so as pointed out by you, we are on RC0. If you're not, this is not for you, because you got to be an RC0. Or if you're watching this video at some point in the future, you got to be at RC whatever, or whatever you're going to have by then. It's got to be this or higher. As usual, new database. We've seen this one before in our last demo, so I'm doing that preview feature thingy again, which is a
Mhm.
requirement in RC0 for basically all the AI-related features. And for ONNX to work, there's another ASPI configure that we need. So we're going to need to enable external AI runtimes. And what that basically allows us to do is, rather than talking to it's a slightly confusing name because it should be internal AI runtimes enabled now that I think of it. Because what we did
Yeah.
so far when we calculated embeddings and everything, we sent it over the network to our Llama. We could have sent it to OpenAI in Azure or anywhere else. So we were talking to an HTTPS port, whereas with ONNX, and that's the big difference,
Mhm.
everything happens locally on the same machine. Nothing leaves your box, nothing goes over the network. And this is, again, from my perspective, the main use case for what we're doing here, because that means all that data remains not only on your premises, but inside the memory of your box.
Yeah, I think
There's a
there's a
caveat
debate,
to it.
right? There's a
You're
debate,
going to see
though.
in
I
a second.
think if we look at the existing implementation of external model, right? It's has to be over HTTPS. It has to be a trusted certificate. Now, yes, it leaves the machine and it goes to the other system and it gets processed, but the transport's secure and you can handle the other levels of security with authorization, right? But
Agreed.
we will debate that in another show.
It's going to be a spicy one.
Yeah.
So here's a little script in here. First of all, huge shout out to Brian Spendolini from the product group, because he helped me a ton. He got me started with a blog post, and he also helped me a ton figuring out where I was too stupid to get things moving. Little disclaimer here. What I'm doing here is because there's also a link to his original blog post, and basically what you would need to do by the books is you compile your own DLLs and everything. So there's a couple of open source stuff. You download it, you do a git clone, then you do a build of that. Me being lazy, efficient as I am, I went ahead and went to a GitHub and just downloaded precompiled DLLs. They obviously come with no warranty. So if you consider doing this in production, do it proper and compile your own DLLs.
Right.
Still, this worked quite fine for me. That have to
Wait.
sit in
So,
specific. Go
so
ahead.
we're loading someone else's compiled DLLs into our database engine, Ben. Is that what's happening here?
Well, first of all, we're not loading it into the database engine. We're loading into Launchpad. We're loading into the machine
Oh,
learning services. Still, we're taking someone that we've never met, DLLs from the internet. This is basically the equivalent to someone that you're talking to on a chat app on the internet and that you're going to meet in a dark
well,
park.
it's also like, hey, I'm just gonna. I mean, we've done this before. If ever has anyone ever Docker run anything? Right, you're loading someone's
Yeah,
code directly in your data center.
exactly.
No,
So,
but I think all kidding aside, I think the joking part about that is this: machine learning services with Launchpad is an external memory space, external process inside the database engine with different levels of privilege. So whilst there is other things being loaded, it's done in the most secure way possible inside of machine
Yes,
learning services, wrapped up inside a Launchpad, which is the ability to run external code in a secure way
agreed.
on a SQL server, not inside the engine.
Agreed. So basically, what this thingy does is it downloads, it creates the directories first. It downloads the DLLs that we need. They need to have very specific names. Again, it's all laid out, explained in that blog post, and it also sets the permissions to those files to the an MS SQL Launchpad service user. So, but basically running this thing on your SQL box, that's the important part.
Mhm.
Um, that basically takes care of all of that for us. And then we can create an external model, which again, it should be an internal model or a nearby, a local whatever model, but still the
A
same syntax.
a nexternal model, Ben. Nexternal.
Oh, that should be a sticker.
Yeah.
So we do a create external model as we did with our Olama before, but rather than pointing it at an HTTPS endpoint, we say, hey,
Mhm.
this is where your model sits. This is where your runtime sits. This is the model type, yada, yada. So all the information that is basically required for that sits in here. Everything that's happening is happening through these local DLLs in machine learning services. And that's an entirely different approach, obviously, than sending stuff through HTTPS.
Mhm.
And like I said, it comes at the benefit of not sending anything over the network. I'm pretty sure there's other use cases, but that's the biggest one for me. It comes at a cost. So let me create this model. And I can do, as we did before, AI generate embeddings, SQL Server 2025. Use model ONNX model. What we will see, it's a rather small model. You can already tell that by the number of digits here, so less precision. In case you do not remember the embeddings by heart from our previous model, let me do the Olama CPU thingy again. Same text. You can see, well, first of all, it's an entirely different model. So it will be an entirely different vector. That makes sense. But we can already see by the number of digits, way higher precision. I'm deliberately using my CPU here rather than my GPU. ONNX could use a GPU if there's a GPU in your SQL server. You don't traditionally have GPUs in your database server because why? So just to have a rather fair comparison when it comes to performance, this is kind of what I did there. So creating a random text tables again, as we did before, using the REST API feature to load 100 book titles from the Open Library API in there. So we have a couple of book titles in there. And I can now go ahead and do an update random text set embeddings equals AI generate embeddings using my Olama CPU, 1.8 seconds for my CPU using
That's
Olama.
fast.
It's not that fast. I mean, also in all defense, these are very short text. So when it comes to very little text,
Mhm.
I've even seen a bunch of cases where the CPU would beat the GPU because the GPU still has to actually load the model into memory first, so it comes with a little overhead. So if you
Yes.
have very little rows with very short text, the CPU may win. Uh, I'm gonna go grab a coffee. I got some time here.
This seems slow, Ben.
It is slow. So for this specific example, it's going to take around 45 seconds. That's what it took in my previous test. So
Mhm.
significantly longer than the 1.8 seconds it did on my CPU. So uh, in all in all fairness, I did not go ahead and went into researching all kinds of different models because I'm sure there's faster models out there also running on ONNX. I'm also sure seeing this, there is no way I could get to the same performance. And that kind of makes sense because if you think of the launchpad, if you think of machine learning services basically being an incubator for this kind of technology, for these capabilities, Olama is a very specific tool that is optimized basically, if you want so, for one single task, which is answering AI model query, which can either be just regular prompts or calculating embeddings. 46 seconds, there we go. So yeah, your mileage may vary on that. Doing some proper research on different models, we could probably bring that number down. I'm very confident that without tweaking the hardware, and those two VMs have the VM running my CPU Olama and the VM running my SQL Server, they have the exact same setup. So
Mhm.
this is as fair as it gets. So without changing the hardware, because of course I could throw more CPUs at it, I could throw a GPU at it, and that would increase performance. But I'm pretty sure nowhere near something like Olama or OpenAI would get it for us.
Agreed. Yeah, I think one of the design principles or things that you would consider is if I stick a GPU inside of my SQL server, then most likely just that SQL server is going to have access to it. If I had it as part of an Olama implementation where I could expose access to that GPU via REST and it can become a shared resource in the data center,
Yep,
that kind of adds more value to that. But obviously, the security boundary stuff that we were talking about earlier, if it needs to be within the single memory space of a single machine, there you go. Right. So
agree.
obviously, pros and cons there. But at 46 seconds, I don't have a lot of 100 row tables, Ben, that I'd be satisfied with the build time of my embeddings if I had a gazillion rows, like some of the databases I work with do.
Agreed on that. What I would say to that is, I mean, you would not necessarily calculate embeddings on all your large fact tables because lots of them are usually or often just numbers. And
Mhm.
then there's the difference between, are we talking about the initial calculation of the embeddings and the
Yeah.
ongoing task? And for example, if you're like, well, you have your product master data and you're calculating embeddings for product descriptions, you could have a trigger. So only if your product description changes, and then you're going to calculate that single embedding, and that's probably not going to happen. Well, depending on what line
Change
of
tracking,
business you're in.
Ben, not triggers. We did a whole episode on change tracking.
Well, same, same.
No.
You could have a fabric pipeline that will then trigger a Power Automate task that will
Where
do
do I
the
disconnect from this podcast? Click.
Control Plus. No, so like I said, there is value in this,
Yes.
just from the pure security perspective, as long as you're not then afterwards exposing all that data that you were trying to secure through regular queries, because then all that goes out the window, obviously. I would argue that since all the requests to our Olama are happening through HTTPS, this is happening in a very secure manner already anyway. Then again, you could argue, well, but we're only using Engine because Olama doesn't do SSL. We have NGINX in front of it, and the communication between these two happens through HTTP. There's use cases for it, but they are slim. That's what I'm saying. Still, the fact that I could easily just use my exact same code, like my AI generate embeddings and all that, and then just point it at different models, I think there's a lot of value in that as well, because that means for different use cases, there's some stuff I want to have public and then I want to use my local GPUs for it. I'm going to use OpenAI for it. Then there's stuff that I do not want to have out in the open, but I'm happy to run that over the network. So I'm going to use my Olama. And then
Mhm.
there's this very small stuff that I want to do whatever with, honestly, but it needs to happen in memory only. That's where ONNX comes into play. That's my take on it.
Wasn't this like an early 90s like rap group, ONNX?
I think you're confusing them with Run DMC
Ah, okay. Run
or Run
DLL.
BDC or whatever the name
Yeah.
was. I should have worn my Run BDC shirt for today if I had known this joke was coming. I'm not prepared. But speaking of 90s music,
Hmm.
shall we play the music?
Let's play the music.